Well, this is our 2018 student life group leader training. Of course, we did not record the actual training, and so this is me redoing some pieces of that training. If you are watching this video because you missed our 3-hour training back about 2 weeks ago now, I'm going to leave out the gospel-centered piece. And the reason why is because Garner talked about it both at the Leaders at 6 meeting, and he talked about it on this past Sunday, so just 2 days ago, to the whole church. And so I have copied and pasted the link to this Sunday's sermon because I think it's a great understanding of both gospel-centered, and then he reiterates what he talked about at the Leaders at 6 meeting, which is our vision and process. And so if you weren't at either, you need to watch both videos, and hopefully you've already watched the first one. If you weren't at ours, you just need to go back and probably listen to maybe the first 20 minutes of that one first before you come to this, because I'm going to be talking through gospel-centered student ministry with the assumption that you understand gospel-centered. Where at our training 2 weeks ago with all student life group leaders, I talked about gospel-centered first. And so if you haven't, go watch that. It's going to shorten this video a little bit, but realize you need to go watch that other piece before you watch this one. So what I want to do is I want to just talk through the second part of the training. And I really want to touch base on helping you understand the differences between what gospel-centered student ministry looks like versus other forms of student ministry, and then go, so what do we then focus on, which are called the 5 pillars, pulled from the book Gospel-Centered Student Ministry by Cameron Cole, that we kind of build, the kind of foundational pillars that we build things on. Now, we do things a little bit different, and different student ministries can, but we hold to those pillars. Let me start by saying this, that gospel-centered ministry is different. And that's why you need to go listen to the first 20 minutes of the sermon this past Sunday, which was, once again, as I said, it was talked about the Leaders at 6, and then we talked about the beginning of this training, and Jessica talked about the beginning of her children's ministry training, and Adam with his life group leaders. And the reason why is because it just looks totally different. I'm hoping maybe by giving you some different pictures of student ministry models here, that you'll see just how different it is. And so there's 3 models within the articles that I gave you talked about this, that were preparing you for the training. But there's 3 models of student ministry that's out there. And I would say that the gospel-centered one is not even the one I grew up in. And so I have seen all 3 of these models within different student ministries in my time as a middle school and high school student, going and then post-interning and assisting, and then working full-time for. And so the first one is called Gospel Absent, and this is maybe the most obvious one. It's probably the easiest to spot. This is the one that essentially Jesus is this motivational figure, right? And he inspires us to live better lives. This is the best life now mentality. This is a prosperity understanding of the gospel, and that's why it's absent. It's because it's not the gospel. This is we get up on a stage on Wednesday, and we have these epic teaching series that really have nothing to do with Scripture, nothing to do with the gospel, just applicable, relevant. We don't want to lose that relevance, because then we lose students, and the way you don't lose relevance is you don't talk about Jesus and the things Jesus talked about, because most of those things were not relevant, in the sense that under the assumption that when we say relevance here, we mean relevance in pulling more people in. This is how God wants us to live versus we are sinners who need God to save us. It's the first one. It's you're not neglecting you're not necessarily neglecting what God is saying about how we should live. You're picking and choosing, but you're definitely not talking about Jesus. You're definitely not talking about our sin, and you're definitely not talking about being saved. And if you do, it's on a very small scale. It's maybe at the end, and Jesus wants to deliver or save, and so if you want to, come talk to us. But that's essentially maybe not even there. In fact, in a gospel-absent student ministry, I would say it's not there. And in experiencing this, particularly in one of the student ministries I was in high school, oftentimes this is the easiest way to run a student ministry. If you want numbers, this is the one you go with, gospel absent. The second one is probably the one that most of us are going to be most familiar with, and this is gospel present. And so the gospel's there. The gospel's there as something that saves us, but not necessarily as you're going to hear it. And hopefully, like I said, you stopped earlier and went and listened to the sermon. It doesn't keep us or grow us. It doesn't sustain us. We're not, as Martin Luther said, the Christian life starts at the foot of the cross and you never leave. You leave. You go on to other things. The gospel simply becomes this fire insurance policy, justification but no sanctification. Galatians 3:3 is a great one to reference here. Discipleship then therefore becomes simply my words of counsel, my wisdom, my past experiences. Programs are geared towards helping students live good lives. That's the goal. We got them in. Now we just help them not drink, do drugs, or have sex before marriage. And that's essentially what we're presenting to students. How do we help you live good lives that you can feel good about? With the assumption that we have the definition of what a good life is. We talk about initial salvation, and even the final salvation comes up. Remember, death, going to heaven. But the problem is there's no adoption theology in the middle. There's no, you are His. And therefore He is working in you, and He's working through you, and He's reminding you, and He's wanting you to see Him constantly over and over and over. It's a message that saves but does not shape. I think a great example of this is one of our students shared with us about a story at a small local church here in this area, and she was helping with a VBS at that church, and they had a maze set up for the kids to walk through, and get to different pieces in the maze. It's kind of like one of those books that you read as a kid, and you would get to a certain page, and then you'd have to decide, do I go to this page or do I go to this page? And then Jesus was at the end of the maze, and the whole idea was, sure, you're saved, but you're working your way towards Jesus. It's no better than a Roman Catholic understanding of the gospel. Yes, Jesus is there. Yes, Jesus saves, but you better be working your way towards Him. And so this is not the gospel. This is a gospel present, yes. But Jesus, what we understand as the gospel is the adoption theology part, that Jesus is not only, you could take it as far to go, He's in the maze with us, but gospel-centered takes it a step further and says He's already accomplished the maze. There's nothing for you to accomplish. You get Him. And that's the beauty of it. And so gospel present is the gospel's there. You hear about it. You get the altar calls. You're getting the numbers. But post that, discipleship simply becomes what you can give them as life group leaders, and what savvy, intellect or wisdom or past experiences that we can give them to help them live better lives. And that's not what we want either. So what do we want? We want a gospel-centered student ministry. This is a holistic understanding of the daily effects of saving faith. We want students, whether it be a test, a hard relationship, a sports team dilemma, a home situation, spiritual habits, we want them to get Jesus in all of that. And we want them to see Jesus in all of that, how he's present in all of that, and how he's our motivation within all of that. This is an understanding of adoption theology, that they're God's child who is loved. Now, there's not a better version of them that God is waiting on before he fully loves them. There's not a you make it through the maze and you'll get to be loved even more. No, he has adopted you. He loves you like his own son, Jesus. Adoption theology, justification, that objective understanding within Christianity that we have been taken from the kingdom of darkness, and placed into the kingdom of his beloved Son. We are justified. We are set free from the sin which condemned us to hell, and we are saved to the Father, who loves us, and we're united with Christ in that as a son or a daughter of the King. We're justified. And then you have the atonement part. All sins are dealt with. We don't mess up. We have a student in your small group who is struggling with addiction, or is struggling with self-image, or is self-harm. These are the ones that tend to be very habitual, that take time to get out of. We are not waiting around for the next time they sin. All of a sudden, God slaps them on the hand and says, no, do better for me. And now atonement says all past, present, and future sins have been atoned for. Our motivation to follow him should not be to gain his love. Our motivation to follow him is the understanding that we have been loved, even though we are in many ways not lovely. And now all of a sudden obedience takes a whole new light. There's a great story within the Gospel-Centered Youth Ministry book, and I don't have it with me here at home, but the whole story is about this kid in this guy's student ministry who's addicted to pornography. And for the longest time he was told, just don't do this, put this on your computer, just try harder, just have faith. And all those things are horrible help in the light of an addictive sin, a constant struggle of a sin. And I shared this at the training, but I take this very personally, because for me it was 11 years of wrestling and struggling through that very thing. And it wasn't until key people like Chris Hopkins and Roy Lehman came into my life and started preaching the gospel to me, and started going, no, what needs to happen is your heart needs to change. You need to understand your sin and in the way that God does, and understand how much you need Jesus, and when you come to then know Jesus and how much he loves you even in your unloveliness. Then obedience takes a whole nother obedience begins to happen with a whole different motivation. And that motivation becomes, I begin to love him more than I do the things that aren't lovely and don't fill me. And this is the idea here. And then you get future hope. You get glorification. Sure, you get the moment of going at some point. You will be with him for eternity. No sorrow, no tears, no pain, no sin struggles. You get the whole picture, the holistic understanding of how all four of those are actively playing a part in our life now. This results in a lower view of self, a higher view of God, hence the series we're walking through. You have to understand God first before you understand yourself and the sin that you bring to the table, and then the importance of Jesus, and like all of it fits together. So this is why we talk through certain things with students, such as who is God. And what this leads to is mobilization. We truly believe that gospel-centered student ministry is what will mobilize students past high school to stay within the church. The statistics are staggering of students who leave after high school and don't come back until either A, they're married with kids simply for their kids, or at all to the church. And I think much of the reason is because of gospel-absent and gospel-present student ministry models, not gospel-centered. We've got to be gospel-centered. We've got to give them something substantial, which is a relationship with their Creator, their Father, understanding how he sees them and their sin, um, and then what that looks like to now live out with the correct motivation, whether you're dealing with sin or you're dealing with evangelism or you're dealing with worship or, you're dealing with community, all of those things. We believe gospel-centered student ministry addresses. And so mobilization, we want to see our students mobilized through thought and action out of a motivation of love, of their relationship with the one who loves them. The idea of that we are far more sinful than we would ever be willing to admit, and yet we're far more loved than we could ever imagine. We were so sinful that he had to die for us, but he loved us so much he wanted to die for us. Both sides of the coin are so important, and we want students to understand that. And so the way that we do that is we build our student ministry upon 5 pillars within gospel-centered student ministry. The first is we constantly should be talking about the gospel message. Every conversation you have with students, I said this in the meeting, we have about 38 Wednesday nights a year. Once you take out small group Wednesdays, Christmas parties, Project Shines, Wednesdays that were off for holidays and stuff, right? Down to 38. Then you push that all the way down to probably about 27, 28. Middle school, you get about 30 minutes in life group a night. High school, depending on the night, you either get 15 to 20 minutes or an hour. So split that down the middle. Let's go 30 again. So you're all getting about 30 minutes a night for 28 Wednesday nights. That's not a lot of time. And so we should be pointing them constantly to the gospel. And you go, okay, what about this Who is God series? Well, even within a series that is more apologetic, I would say, of the convincing of different things about who God is. I think it's definitely more systematic theology in its content, but it's definitely apologetic. And we have students asking questions from this series that are very much, how do we know these things to be true? Well, those things are not necessarily, we're not going to be necessarily pointing to Jesus and all of those things. But we we are. John Piper's book, God is the Gospel. You understand God, you understand the gospel. You understand the character of God, you understand the heart of the gospel. So we get that through the teaching. And then you go into worship. Our song should be focused in on Christ. They should be Christocentric, whether we're singing to Him or about Him or to each other about Him. We should be doing those things. And then in your life groups, oh my gosh, every opportunity you get, you should be pointing them back to the gospel. Don't point them to your own wisdom. Don't point them to, your really cool, quote that you learned in 6th grade. I mean, those things are great and they have a place and a time, but it better not be your main point and what you end with. What your main point and what you end with should be is the gospel. You should be pointing them to the gospel. Point them to Jesus. Point them to how, you're having trouble forgiving your friend. I understand, man, what they did to you is wrong. But what a great reminder of though you did not deserve to be forgiven, you were forgiven. And so I think your motivation should be, you're going to have to forgive. You can't withhold that forgiveness. And yeah, that's going to be a process, but you need to begin walking through that process and realize that your heart's been exposed, that you're forgetting a part of the gospel that has saved you. And I want to preach it to you and remind you of it. That's what you should be leading with. And I'll tell you, those are the hard ones because it's not necessarily what they always want to hear. And they might miss a few weeks because you gave them the hard answer, but they'll be back. And so the gospel message is key. We talk about it often. We talk about it all the time. It should be constantly quick to come off our lips. And the reason why this is important is because it's a behavior modification versus a children of God mindset on Wednesday nights. We're not there to modify their behavior. We are there to remind them of who they are and how God sees them and how Christ has worked within them. Understanding and confidence in the gospel. That's what we want to leave them with. That's what will mobilize them. That's what will keep them in the church. And so we must be doing that. The gospel message must be a massive pillar. The second pillar is theological depth through expository biblical teaching. I get so tired of hearing students can't handle it. You're going to have to go lighter. When we came to Legacy, we shot that in the foot. We said, no. Students want it. They're hungry for it. If you were there this past Wednesday, you know it, particularly in high school when you've got high school students during a Q&A time. I could have probably stayed there for 2 or 3 hours, if you want me to be honest. And they would have kept asking and asking and asking why. Because they're hungry. I was talking to somebody today at the church about his student ministry experience and talking about the series and the questions people were asking. It's like, wow, we weren't there in high school. And I said, but let me ask you, were you given a place to be there? To actually a place to ask those questions? No. Okay, well then that's why you weren't thinking of it. Because you had put them and pushed them down into a part where you knew, if I bring these up, everyone's going to think I'm doubting. And then I'm going to be the one who doesn't have a great relationship with God. And that's just not happening. And so what we do is on Wednesday nights, we get deep. We go expository. We go Bible. Even in who is God. We've got a passage in Exodus that we're breaking down. Last week, more surface level to hit some main points. This week, in depth to figure out where Moses was and why he needed to be reminded that God is the I am who I am in light of what God was calling him to do and how that relates and is applicable to us today and how we should apply that. That is what it looks like. It's front and center. The Bible is front and center. We lead with it. We answer questions through it. It's the biblical worldview versus your worldview. I could get up on a stage and give a great Wednesday night message. And in all honesty, probably attract kids a lot faster. But that's not what I want to do. The speediness of growth is we will grow. We have grown. But we've grown at a beautiful pace of helping students get where they need to be, foundation laid. Get where they need to be, foundation laid. All along, they start bringing people. That's a healthy model of growth. Now, if God brought 500 tomorrow, because God wanted to bring 500 tomorrow to hear the gospel message, we'd be overwhelmed. We wouldn't have enough space. We wouldn't have enough leaders. But we would stick to doing the same thing. And that's important. And the Bible has to stay the focal point of what we teach from on Wednesday nights. And it has to be in-depth, expository teaching, even in the midst of a series, a Who is God series. Oftentimes there's a great story within the articles I think I sent you or the book. I can't remember. But Cameron Cole talks about this idea of how he feels, I think it's Cameron Cole, of how he feels sometimes after leaving on Wednesday nights. The songs didn't go right. The games were an epic failure. He didn't feel like he taught very well. And then, he feels like, oh my gosh, what just a waste of time. And then the Spirit reminds him and then he preaches it to himself. Yeah, but the Word of God was proclaimed. And if the Word of God was proclaimed, the gospel was proclaimed. And if the gospel was proclaimed, if the Word of God was proclaimed and you did it in a gospel-centered way, then something was proclaimed that changes lives. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes that's Wednesday nights. Going home, I go, okay, God, I'm trusting that you're working in the hearts and minds of those who heard what was talked about tonight. The third, so the first is the gospel message. Second, theological depth through expository biblical teaching. Third is a relational discipleship. A relational discipleship. This is invested in the spiritual formation of each student. We do that through Wednesday nights. We do that through parents. We do that through extracurricular activities. This is kind of the relating versus intentionality concept here. We talked about this a lot last year. You're only going to get as much out of your life group as you put in. If you simply show up on Wednesday nights, you can get some depth there. They'll see you as consistent. They'll see you as that Wednesday night person. But if you don't ever get to know their parents, and you don't ever get to see them outside of a Wednesday night setting, you're going to be limited of what discipleship looks like as a life group leader with students. It looks different, I'm telling you. You can get away with doing life group as adults every week, once a week. You can grab some great depth from that and never go do anything with any of those people outside of that setting. But as adults, that's different. We don't necessarily need as much. As students, we're looking for it. We're looking for not only consistency, but we're looking for someone who goes out of their way. Or they're looking for someone who goes out of their way. And so intentionality is seen, and it makes a huge difference. Discipleship should be personal. You should be pushing and prodding constantly. Pushing and prodding. And look, we just had a story this week of a student since May that we have been pushing for baptism. This is the next step. This is the step of obedience that's next. She's fought it. She's had moments of I'm doing it, moments of stop talking to me about it. We've pushed and prod till finally she hit a breaking point. She was frustrated, mad, not meeting with God anymore. And we finally had to push and prod even harder and say, look, the reason why you're miserable right now is because you're being disobedient. If you would choose obedience, this is on you. This is not on him. All of a sudden she chooses obedience. And hello, she's back to normal. I don't care to be best friends with students or their parents. I don't. I care to push them towards Jesus, and you should too. We should be on the same team there. That's not to say you have to be mean, or you can't ever just relate and talk about football, but at some point you better stop talking about football and get to Jesus and how they're doing, living out their life as a believer. A fourth is partnership with parents. And we really started this last Flubber number, and you're going to see some of that really kicking off this year with parent focus groups and things like that as I become more intentional with those pieces, as we've now built a good team and a good foundation of leadership. The partnership with parents is the idea of building and keeping the trust of the parents. We should be on the same team with them unless they're just on a totally different team, and then we need to address that. And we have before, and we still are to this day, with a few different families, and we know that, and it's hard and it's tough, and we keep plugging, but we have to do that. We still have to have their trust as they come to our church and their students go to our student ministry. Parents are the primary spiritual leaders of their students. I say this all the time, not you. So if you're leading them this way and their parents are leading them this way, then we're not doing our job well. Now, if this way is the wrong way, then we address that. But if it's the right way, even if it's not necessarily the way that you would do it, you better still get on that page. That's important. Most parents feel like they are failing their kids. So encourage them. Don't come behind and do something totally opposite. Encourage them. And then finally, we believe in, with the fifth pillar, is intergenerational integration. This is why you're here, by the way. All different ages. College, young married, young family, parents, teenage parents. This is why Sunday mornings we don't have a student ministry time. They, 6th grade and above, they sit with their parents. They sit in the service. They sit around other believers. A great article came out in the Gospel Coalition. Pablo, our Connect pastor, shared it with me, and it's the idea that student ministry is not just a ministry in the church; it's the church. It's not just that ministry, which is the next generation of Christians within the church. No, it's the church. We should be pouring as much time and energy into student ministry as we do anything else. Kids ministry, and then anything else. Women's ministry as we do anything else. Missions as much as we do anything else. Why? Because it's the church. That's what we should be pouring our time and energy into. We just happen to have different people who help make sure those ministries are running well, and we believe that at Legacy. It's why we have a team mentality. because, as we pour into students, it gets us into homes. And as we pour into homes, it plays a part in the bigger church. Yes, but at the same time, that student is no less important than us getting to the home. And so we believe in intergenerational integration. We want them to become part of the church around other believers of different ages, of different ethnicities, of different backgrounds, of different genders. All of that is extremely important to us. So we want to be gospel-centered, not gospel-absent, not just simply gospel-present. We want to build on 5 pillars: the gospel message, theological depth through expository biblical teaching, relational discipleship. We want to partner with parents, and we want them to experience intergenerational integration into the body, that they are believers. And so this is Gospel-Centered Student Ministry. Gospel-Centered Student Ministry by Cameron Cole is a great book to read if you want to go into depth on some of these things. The Prodigal God is a great book to go into depth on if you want a great reflection on the gospel and the Christian faith, and just some of the things that Garner talked about, that I've talked about. But definitely, like I said, go listen to the sermon, at least the first 20 minutes or so of the gospel-centered part. The rest is the vision and process. But all of this gives you a great groundwork for where we're heading. And we need to be on the same page as we head there together. So looking forward to a great year. Love you guys. Thank you for all that you do. And we'll see you Wednesday.